Imagine this scenario. You've just aced an interview, leaving a strong impression. As the interview concludes, you're faced with the classic question. So, do you have any questions for me? The answer is yes. To have a chance at securing the job, always say yes. To show the employer that you've come prepared and are interested in the job, always have a set of questions to ask at the end of the interview. Having a list of questions to ask the interviewer makes you look interested, enthusiastic, and engaged. All qualities that an employer is looking for. It also gives you one final chance to highlight your relevant qualities and experiences. Try to come up with at least 4 to 5 questions to ask the interviewer. That way, if 1 or 2 of these questions are already answered during the earlier discussion, you have backups in place. Here are some questions to avoid. Avoid asking questions that focus too much on what the organization can do for you. Save questions about salary and vacation for when you get the job offer. Also, stay away from questions that typically require a yes or no answer, as often the answers to these questions can be found on the organization's website. I suggest you ask open-ended questions to facilitate a dialogue. While it's okay to ask your interviewer to clarify certain points, I would avoid asking questions on topics that have already been covered. You don't want them to think that you haven't been paying attention. Now let's get into the different types of questions you should be asking the interviewer. During an interview, you will usually be provided with a general background on the firm or the organization in terms of work culture, expectations, responsibility. But if certain points are not covered and you would like more clarity, here are some questions that you should be asking about the employer themselves. If you're applying to a firm and it provides services in different practice areas, if one area is of interest to you, ask them about that practice area to see how busy that area is and whether you'll get work and experience in it. Do people tend to specialize at your firm, or do most people have a more general practice? This is helpful to know if you want to niche down to one area of law or to gain wider exposure and experience. How are files staffed? Do articling students work directly with partners? How would you describe the culture of the firm? What types of people succeed here? How is work allocated to students and/or young associates? Can you describe the firm's management structure? This will give you a better idea of who you will be working with. Who will you be reporting to? Who else is working with you on your team? Do you have legal assistants? Are there any common mistakes from past students or newer associates you've noticed that I can learn from? The next set of questions are questions that help place you in the role. I like to ask the next few questions in a way that helps the interviewers envision me in that position. Here are some of those questions. What would a typical workday look like for me in this role? What are the most immediate projects that I would take on? What's the performance review process like here? How often would I be formally reviewed? Can you tell me about the team I'll be working with? What goals would you set for me for the next 6 months? Instead of asking the question, what would a typical workday for the successful candidate look like in this role, I reframe the question to ask, what would the typical workday for me look like in this role? By doing that, I am inviting the interviewer to picture me in this position. You are conveying a subtle confidence by asking questions in this way, and I'd like to think also speaking it into existence. Be sure to ask questions that help build connection and rapport with the interviewers. Everyone likes to talk about themselves, so give your interviewer an opportunity to do that with the next set of questions. What do you enjoy most about working at? What's one of the most interesting projects you've worked on here? What gets you most excited about the company's future? What do you find most challenging about working for? What are some skills that you possess or developed over the years that have helped you excel in your current role? How did you get into this practice area? What is your advice for a young lawyer starting out? I usually make notes on the responses to these questions, and I'll refer back to them when I'm drafting a follow-up email to the interviewers. When it's appropriate, I'll include a tidbit of something I learned about the interviewer or something that we discussed during the interview in that follow-up email. This shows my active listening skills and that I care about the position and about the person asking the questions. Ask questions that address what is important to you. It's understandable that you want to impress the interviewer, but interviewing is a two-way street. You need to be assessing the job, the employer, and the manager, and figuring out whether this is a job you want and would do well in. If you're just focused on getting the job and not on whether it's the right fit for you, you're in danger of ending up in a place that will cause you to struggle and to be miserable. So ask questions that address topics that are important to you to help you figure out whether it'll be a good fit for you and your personality. If flexibility and remote work is important to you, then ask questions about the remote work policy. Examples include, does the firm have a remote work policy? Can you tell me more about it? What are the expectations around billable hours? Opportunities for growth and development are important to you. And some questions you could ask are, what opportunities will I have to learn and grow? What learning and professional development opportunities are available to your employees? If you're interested in litigation, then ask something like, do students get to go to court? If so, how often? That said, you shouldn't just take your interviewer's word for it. They're also trying to leave you with a good impression of the employer. So it's important that you do your due diligence and you reach out to people in your network who may have worked with that employer previously to get more information about that role, the position, the employer, the work culture, help you figure out if it's a good fit for you. After you've had time to ask these questions, here are 2 final questions you should ask to wrap up the interview. The first one is my favorite question to ask. It could be a hit or miss, and it can give you a better idea of where you stand in terms of how the interview went. And that question is there anything on my resume or anything that I've said during this interview that would cause you to hesitate in offering me this position? This is a tricky question because you don't know what the interviewer may say. Asking this question shows a sense of vulnerability and a willingness to address your weaknesses head on. It also gives you the chance to address any gaps or to provide any further explanation. If they give you an answer, then this will provide you more knowledge on your weaknesses that you can address for future interviews. But most interviewers say no, and in a sense, they're admitting that you're a suitable candidate for the position. And as a result, it further helps the interviewer envision you in the role as well. The last question that you should ask is, what are the next steps and expected timeline? This is a straightforward logistical question that can help greatly in terms of your sanity. Asking this question will give you a timeline for what's going to be happening in the background with the employer. In terms of next steps, maybe they still have to interview a couple more candidates and it may take longer than expected. It's useful to know so you're not obsessively checking your phone and waiting around to hear back from them. And it could be a situation where the hiring manager is going on vacation for a week. So knowing this information in advance is helpful so that you can focus on other things while you're waiting. And if you're told that you won't hear back for another 2 weeks and you haven't heard back by that stated day, then it's fair for you to reach out and to ask in a follow-up email asking about the status to learn whether they made a decision or not. So those are some of the questions that I typically ask at the end of an interview. I hope that was helpful. The next time you go into an interview, always have questions ready for the end when you get that classic question. So do you have any questions for me? Make sure you say yes and you ask to show that you're committed and that you're interested in the job and to increase your chances of securing the position. All the best, and thank you for watching.